Hey everybody, this is Kiara, the Windrider. It's Age of Gaia channel and Conscious Awakening Network. So for the past couple weeks, I've been reading some selections from my new book, Issa, Son of the Sun. So what I'll do tonight is continue chapter 11 onwards. And for those of you who've missed this, just go back to the archives on Conscious Awakening Network, or you can go to my YouTube channel, Kiara Windrider, and you'll find us there. So welcome. So chapter 11, Takshashila. They continued on their journey across the Khyber Pass and into the valley kingdom of Gandhara, which means fragrance. Surrounded by hills, flowers, and natural beauty, it was an exquisite testimony to a land flowing with milk and honey. The capital city here was Takshashila, which lay at the crossroads of two great trade routes. There was the Royal Uttarpatha Highway, which linked Gandhara with Magadha, and the Silk Road, which they had just come down, which continued to extend out through the rest of Kashmir into Nepal, Tibet, and China. Takshashila was also home of the first university in India, originally founded by Iskandar the Great, as a hub for philosophical inquiry, and his last stop before returning back to Gracia, where he shortly afterwards died. Thousands of students came from all over the world in order to study here, including princes, merchants, and priests. It was a cauldron of new thought, representing all the known arts and sciences of the day, such as economics, history, political science, and the various spiritual traditions of that period. The kingdom of Gandhara was ruled by Issa's uncle, King Gondophares. Issa's family remained in the kingdom of Gandhara for some time. Gondophares often took Issa out riding in his kingdom, introducing him to the vast beauty of that land, sharing the history of the land and people, and the political alliances of his day. Gandhara and Kush were neighboring kingdoms, two of the Israeli principalities of the Kashmiri region. To the west were the Parthians and the Bactrians and the Persians. Further east were the kingdoms of Magadha and Kapilavastu. You have a special relationship with the principality of Kush, Gondophares once told Issa, with a twinkle in his eyes. But your parents have chosen not to tell you more than this. You will discover the rest in your own time, in your own way. The great university at Takshashila fascinated Issa. His uncle took him there on a couple of occasions, introducing him to some of the teachers there. I would love for you to study here, Beta, my son. You would be joining nobles and princes from every land in learning about the world. But your path is different. He paused. What you need to learn cannot be learned through books. I wish for you to travel the world and learn the ways of your heart and the ways of spirit. This land of India has been home to great philosophers and adepts. They did not learn what they knew from books and scrolls, but through direct contact with the mysteries of nature and God. He told Issa of when he had taken the Silk Road over Palestine to see him for the first time. You have a destiny to fulfill. Like Siddhartha and the great ones of his land, you will learn to touch the heart of the invisible world, and you will know then what you must do. He held Issa close to him. You are dearly beloved to me, Beta. Soon, your greater journey will begin. Shortly afterwards, a caravan arrived from the Sindh, a region in the western deserts of India. Some among them, known as the Jains, had heard of this marvelous young lad who spoke with the wisdom of the gods and pleaded with him to return home with them for a time. Yusuf had been unwell for some time and felt he needed to remain in Takshashila. But both parents felt the son was ready now to go off on his own. They blessed him, invoking the care and protection of God, and tearly bid him farewell for a time. They did not know then that it would be many years and countless experiences later before they saw each other again in the land of Kashmir. Chapter 12, Journey through Sindh. The caravan went south through the deserts of Rajasthan and into Gujarat. The Jains, like the Buddhists, were an offshoot of the Vedic philosophy of India, and like the Buddhists, had rejected the ritualistic tendencies of the Brahmins and preached absolute equality of men and women, as well as the equality of all castes. They rejected animal sacrifice and believed in nonviolence and respect for all life, including trees, animals, birds, and even insects. Mahavira, the most recent in a lineage of 24 liberated beings known as Jinas, had been born in Bihar about 600 years earlier, shortly before the advent of Siddhartha, the Buddha. Both these men lived very similar lives. Both were born into royal homes. Both left their families at around the age of 30. Both wandered with the ascetics in the forest in search of enlightenment. After undergoing severe austerities in the forest for a number of years, Mahavira, whose name means the great hero, achieved the enlightened state and devoted the remainder of his life walking barefoot across the land, preaching the eternal truths which he had realized to all people, rich and poor, men and women, touchables and untouchables. The Jain religion was thus founded on these principles of equality, nonviolence, and liberation. The monks and nuns of the order were celibate and lived simple and frugally. Much like the Essenes in Iskandariya and Qumran, they did not have any personal possessions. Jains would sweep the floor in front of them as they walked, so as not to harm any creature, and wore nets over their faces, so as not to inadvertently swallow the net. They believed in the transmigration of souls, and that since even insects would one day become humans, killing them would create bad karma, which would someday come back to harm themselves. Karma was defined as the accumulation of good deeds or bad deeds, and it was felt that under the influence of karma, each soul was habituated to seek pleasure in materialistic belongings and possessions, which were the deep-rooted causes of hatred, greed, anger, and other vices, which in turn led to the accumulation of more karma. Thus, the path to liberation was to turn one's back on materialistic possessions of all kinds. In fact, some of the ascetic orders of Jainism went to extreme lengths and would not allow themselves to even own a shred of clothing. They were known as the Digambaras, or the sky-clad ones. There are 5 great vows that all Jains must take. This preceptor, Champa, explained to Issa. The first is ahimsa, or non-violence. This means not to cause harm, not only to humans, but also to any living being. This means that a true Jain abhors not only the flesh of an animal, but also avoids killing plants. It is permissible to eat fruits and vegetables that grow above the ground, but we are not allowed to eat root vegetables since this means killing the plant. The second vow is Satya, to speak the harmless truth only, along which goes Asteya, the principle of non-stealing, which includes not taking anything which isn't directly given. The fourth vow is Brahmacharya, or chastity, and the fifth is Apagriha, which perhaps is the hardest of all to master. Apagriha means non-possession, or complete detachment from all people, places, and material things. The monks and nuns in our tradition must follow these principles totally, he went on. Whereas common people try to follow these rules as far as their lifestyle permits. To Issa, the Jain way of life was a stark contrast to the opulence he had enjoyed at the court of the Parsis. And although some of the ascetic practices felt extreme and unnecessary to him, he was deeply impressed by the emphasis on equality, nonviolence, and respect for life. The practice of solitary contemplation in nature was a balm to his sensitive spirit, for this was something the Essenes were also known for, and he had grown to enjoy the silence of the desert. Here there were deserts as well as forests, and under the guidance of the Jain monks, he learned he could survive for long periods of time in the wilderness, eating little, absorbing the energies of the sun and wind, and listening to the voices that spoke in the stillness of his soul. Issa stayed with the Jain community for about a year. Although he was entreated to stay with them and join the monastic order, he felt it was time to move on. He had heard a lot about the Brahmins and their ancient wisdom, which was the foundation stone of the Jain as well as Buddhist philosophies, and he wanted to study this for himself. And so he found himself making his way down the coast and around the southern tip of India. In the manner of the wandering monks or sadhus of India, he would simply start walking and go where his feet took him, stopping at shelters along the way, which had been specifically built and maintained to support these wandering sadhus. In the evenings, the sadhus would light a fire, cook a simple meal, sing bhajans, and share stories. One day, Issa had a very direct experience of how the laws of karma worked, which is sometimes referred to as the principle of what goes around comes around. He had been presented with a beautifully embroidered blue and white traveling cloak when he left the court of Sarayan on his journey to India. Upon arriving in the rather humid conditions in the Sindh, he realized he didn't need this anymore and had given it away to one of the sky-clad monks. The sky-clad brother lost no time in passing it on to somebody else, and it had made its rounds from one wandering sadhu to another. There came a time when Issa was wandering through the southern swamps of the Malabar coast, heavily infested with mosquitoes, when he came down with an intense fever. His bones ached, and his body went through alternating bouts of hot flashes, followed by intense shivering and cold. It so happened that a sadhu came wandering through the shelter where Issa happened to be staying, carrying that very cloak with him. Upon seeing Issa thus indisposed, he promptly presented him with his own traveling cloak, covering him up to ease the raging fever. Once he had recovered enough to travel, Issa continued his journey, rounding the southern cape and then taking a boat across the sea to Lanka. This island paradise was once the home of Ravana, the so-called demon king, who, according to the epic tales of the Mahabharata, had fought a great battle with Ram, an earlier incarnation of Vishnu. Buddhist missionaries had come and settled here during the time of King Ashoka, and so Lanka had become a fascinating amalgam of Buddhist teachings with older tribal cultures. He visited the pilgrimage site, which houses a tooth of the Buddha, as well as the peak where one of the first ancestors, Adam, was supposedly buried. Not wishing to stay very long, however, he soon returned to the east coast of India, making his way up the coast until he arrived in Puri, in the kingdom of Magadha, at the site of the great Jagannath temple and a major center for Vedic studies. Chapter 13, Among the Brahmins. It had been almost 2 years now since Issa had set out from the kingdom of Persia. His constant travels through the jungles and plains of India, along with the austerities of the journey, had toughened his body so he could walk around barefoot like his fellow sadhus and survive on very little by way of sustenance. His hair had grown long and his skin was tanned a golden brown. And so when he arrived in Puri, he was welcomed by the Brahmins as one of their own kind, although they were surprised that he spoke just a small spattering of the common language, which he had picked up along the way. They did not wonder at his straw-colored hair and blue eyes, for many of the Brahmins themselves were descendants of the Tukarian tribes from the north, or from the Sakyas and the Munis. Also, many soldiers from Iskandar's armies had deserted and found wives among the Indian kingdoms. Their progeny, likewise, were fair-skinned. In fact, the word caste comes from the term varna, which means color, and there was an entire system of social protocols that had been established in India during this time that had to do with the color of one's skin and their subsequent role, status, and value in society. So, Issa was welcomed into the Brahmin community with honor and delight. Like many sadhus who had dedicated their lives to mukti or liberation, Issa's presence radiated a magnetic attraction that derived from the purity of his search for truth. He expressed his wish to learn about the Vedic traditions and was accepted in the math as a novice. The Vedas and the Upanishads were the primary books of wisdom in India at that time, pertaining not only to spirituality, but also to history, culture, and medicine. These writings were thousands of years old, and some were brought into India by the Proto-Aryans living in the regions between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which would have included some of his ancestors. Although Buddhism and Jainism had become the dominant religions in India at that time, Issa wished to study the scriptures in their original form. Thus began an intense phase of study, interspersed with various yoga, breath, and meditation practices to hone his mind, body, and senses to perceive higher realities. Yoga means union, he was told, which means to be equally at home in the spiritual worlds and the physical worlds, equally content with himself as with the company of others, strengthening the body to move more readily, strengthening the body to more readily receive the spirit, and then immersing in the spirit to transcend the addictive patterns of the physical body and senses. Ultimately, it means union with God. Issa's studies and practices intensified his desire to discover the divine force within. He remembered the words of Ezra and his encouragement to pursue the direct path of the nameless God. He remembered what Samayan had said about understanding the root causes of evil and then transcending the duality between good and evil. One of his teachers in Puri was the old Brahmin Agnivesh, whom Issa felt a particular affinity with. Why are there so many names for God? Issa asked him one day. Aren't they in truth all the same? Indeed, yes, they are, responded Agnivesh. But he must understand that the way we understand God is different from the understanding of the priests in your land. We see God in every mountain, every river, every creature, every tree. But there is a single unifying force that flows through all creation, and this is what we call Brahman, the ultimate reality. The difference is that in your land, you believe in one God, but this God is pitted against the many. Here, we also believe in one God, whose face is revealed within the many. So what you call Brahman is what we call God, but it is really the same. Not understanding this essential unity of spirit is the cause of all conflict and suffering, affirmed Agnivesh. Human beings have a tendency to get caught up in Maya, the outer appearances of things, and to lose sight of Mithya, the essence. However, this essence cannot be grasped with the mind alone, he continued. It must be a direct realization, and this is what our sages have devoted their lives to achieve. So Maya is an illusion of the mind, asked Issa. You have grasped the essential concept, said Agnivesh. Maya is the great illusion. It is the great veil that prevents us from realizing that all things are essentially woven together as one. It is the outcome of our dependence on the outer senses to teach us what is essentially invisible and can only be experienced through the heart. The great achievement of our sages has been to outline a path through which it becomes possible to achieve this union of all things. This is what the path of yoga is about, which essentially means joining together. But Issa was not satisfied. Forgive me, my teacher, he said. I've been traveling all these months among the Jains and among the sadhus. I admire their feats of physical endurance and the austerities they put their bodies through. But why is this necessary? How difficult can it be to realize this simple truth? Agnivesh smiled. You are right, Issa. Realizing the truth of oneness is the simplest thing on earth. But so many have become trapped in the veils of illusion. They've become addicted to the conditioning of the mind. And in their search for knowledge, they've become dependent on their outer senses as a means for perceiving reality. And so what is essentially simple often becomes the most difficult of all things to achieve. And this is what the path of yoga is about, to disconnect from false perceptions based on mental conditioning and learn to grasp through direct intuition the essential reality of all things. The physical practices are simply a means for loosening the conditioning of the mind. It is all too easy, however, to let the practices become an end in themselves and lose touch with why the practices were needed in the first place. As the months went by, Agnivesh noted with satisfaction that his young pupil was rapidly making headway in his understanding of the ancient scriptures. He had quickly learned to speak and understand Sanskrit and was spending long hours contemplating the deeper meanings of the sacred writings. One day, Issa confronted Agnivesh with something that had been bothering him for a long time. I don't understand this law of karma, he began. Everything seems to be neatly arranged according to immutable laws of cause and effect. I hurt somebody and I'm hurt back. I help somebody and I'm helped back. This is true, of course. But if I'm constantly worried about how my actions are going to affect and be affected by everything else, where's the room for spontaneity? What if I wish to choose something just because it feels good? Yes, this is an important question, answered Agnivesh. As long as you're trying to achieve something because you think it is the right thing to do, there is still an attachment to outcome. But there comes a time when this changes, not from something you imposed from the outside, but from something that has changed on the inside. There comes a time when you're no longer identified with yourself as a separate individual self. When your identity becomes the whole, there is a natural attunement to the flow and purpose pervading all life in the universe. Once you're connected with this flow, there is no personal will as separate from universal will. Now everything is spontaneous flow. You're no longer thinking about doing something. You simply become the doing. This is what the sages call liberation. It's a freedom from the attachment to any outcome because you're no longer perceiving reality through the lens of cause and effect. You're seeing it as a single unified web of life through which all things move in synchronicity and flow, beyond right or wrong, beyond good or evil. What is evil then? Issa is thinking back to his conversations with Sarayam. Evil means different things depending on your perspective, said Agnivesh. In fact, evil is simply perspective. When you're lost in illusion and duality, there's all the things that make you suffer. When you see yourself as something separate from the rest of life, you place demands on the world that you think will make you happy. And these demands are the basis for greed, anger, hatred, and violence. But when you return to a state of unity, you recognize that just as seasons change and day turns into night, so must all things flow in life. What is created must be destroyed, and what is destroyed must always transform into new creation. When this is accepted fully, evil disappears, and only Brahman remains. When first we embark on this journey of life, we tend to see evil everywhere around us. We make judgments about life and against people, how things should or shouldn't be, how we would change people and make them better, by force if necessary. And then that shifts, and we start seeing ourselves with greater sensitivity and refinement. And then the evil exists only inside ourselves. We judge ourselves for not being good enough, or strong enough, or compassionate enough. And the more we examine ourselves, the more we find something to punish ourselves for. But then there comes a time when there is no more self to punish. For our awareness has shifted from a separate individual identity to the eternal presence that we are, the Atman. And here there's no more duality, no more illusion, thus no more evil. We see that Brahman is everything, and Atman is Brahman. When there's no more need to achieve something from a place of lack or separation, there is no more doer and no more need for doing. Then the doing simply happens on its own, in accordance with the flow of life. And we are liberated from the wheel of karma. Issa had heard this philosophy before, but hearing it from Agnivesh touched him deeply. For Agnivesh had achieved this liberation he spoke of and radiated this eternal presence. Issa allowed himself to drink in these words in contemplation and silence. Chapter 14, Monkhood. There is a ruling myth that when the great Purusha created humanity, the Brahmins were created from his head, the Kshatriyas from his torso, the Vaishyas from his thighs, and the Shudras from his feet. The caste system had originally been devised to delineate specific social functions, where Brahmins were the priests, Kshatriyas the warriors, Vaishyas the traders, and Shudras the craftsmen and workers. This worked well for a time, but then slowly had become degraded into a status system based on the color of one's skin. The caste system seemed to be held in place by the Brahmins, who had the most to gain from it, and who rationalized the existence of the structure by invoking the law of karma. If you're born unlucky, it is because of your past misdeeds, was the way this argument went. And if you accept your status without complaint, then you'll be reborn in your next life into a higher caste. Issa was remembering his time among the Jains, where all people were considered equal, and it was considered a virtue to own nothing and give everything. The monks had renounced their possessions as well as social status when they joined the brotherhood and sisterhood of monks. One day he sought out his teacher and spoke his mind. "Forgive me, Panditji," he said, "but there has been something that has been disturbing me for some time. I understand how the caste system was designed to work, and I know that different roles are needed in order to make a society work. But it doesn't feel quite fair that a poor sweeper or latrine cleaner must continue doing this painful work through their entire lives with no hope for relief. And furthermore, that their children and their children's children must continue doing the same. Where is the justice in this? You have said before that there is no such thing as karma from the perspective of Brahman. Why then do they deserve this thankless existence?" Agnivesh sat still for a long time. They had known each other for over a year now, and he had developed a deep respect and affection for this young man. "Issa, I've wondered about these things myself, and I have no answer for you. I can tell you that in the ultimate sense, there is no evil. But you will point out to me that there are social evils that are built into the foundation of our culture. And to this, I can only hang my head in shame. Sometimes an outsider can see these things clearer than we can, who have become blind through too much familiarity with unquestioned ideals." His eyes clouded over with sadness, and his erect carriage appeared worn and troubled, with a burden he hadn't allowed himself to feel for some time. Issa leaned over to touch his feet respectfully. He was touched that this great Pandit would share these misgivings with him, a mere boy. It strengthened his own resolve. "So what must I do about this, Panditji?" he asked. "What can I tell you, Issa?" Agnivesh's eyes were clear again. "You must look to your own destiny in this. All I can say is that there is a big difference between acting from a place of reaction, where you feel driven by pain in response to what you consider injustice, and acting from a place of stillness, where the Divine Spirit chooses you to be its voice for change. Do you understand the difference? He went on. In the first case, you will simply add your voice into the chaos and reap more chaos. In the second case, you'll be following your own dharma, and nothing will be impossible to you. Issa nodded, feeling as if a great weight was being lifted from his heart. Perhaps it is time to sharpen and hone the power of your will now, my young friend. You have studied enough. You have learned to meditate and still your mind. Are you ready now to follow the path of a monk? He explained to Issa that this was a training in one-pointedness, the single-minded pursuit of a given goal. A monk's task is not to simply follow a rule blindly, or to get lost in rituals, or to become an ascetic to glorify the ego. It is to use the rules and rituals as a means for focusing the mind and taming the body so that deeper insights could rise to the surface. It was a practice for learning to think from the heart and to gradually shift one's identity from the personal ego to the Atman. Chapter 15, Marie of Magadha. The orphaned Adivasi girl had been raised by priests in the temple complex of Puri, which was part of the kingdom of Magadha during those times. She was born among the hill tribes of Magadha, raised to live close to the rhythms of nature that ruled all forms of life. Her mother had died in childbirth, and then her father perished trying to protect her in the stampede of a rogue elephant storming through their little settlement. The traveler wandering through the jungles had found the child lost in the wilderness and carried her along with him until he reached the temple complex of Puri, where he had presented her to the priests for caretaking. She quickly won the hearts of all she came across with her natural grace and wild beauty. As she grew older, she had been taught the temple arts along with other young girls her age, which included the awareness of subtle energy channels and the ability to transmit healing energy with the touch of her hands. She had also been trained in the arts of raising Kundalini in order to enhance the union of Shiva with Shakti. Shakti was the life force held dormant within the Muladhara chakra at the base of the spine, which was linked with the powerful instinctive energies of Matribhumi, Mother Earth. Shiva was the gateway to cosmic consciousness, the unitive energies sealed within the Sahasrara chakra, situated at the very crown of the head. The tantric path had to do with raising Kundalini Shakti from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, and in so doing create a shift in identity from ordinary human consciousness to universal cosmic consciousness. This shift from ego identity to universal identity was fraught with dangers. If the initiate was not ready for this, it could overwhelm the nervous system and damage the energy bodies, sometimes even causing mental instability and death. If the initiate was too attached to fears and base desires, including unresolved sexual needs or an unbalanced thirst for power, this could also trap the rising Kundalini energies within the lower chakras and cause intense pain and suffering. At a certain point in their training, young monks would be encouraged to spend time with the temple priestess, who would help guide the powerful energies liberated through long hours of meditation through the proper Kundalini channels. The monks were required to be celibate through this process so that their sexual energies could be channeled appropriately and lead to a state of cosmic union. Sexual energy was considered to be an integral aspect of the dance of life, although the initiate was trained not to make this an end in itself, but rather a means to move into the undiluted bliss of cosmic consciousness. And so, at a certain stage in his training as a monk, Issa was given his own private quarters within the temple complex and introduced to this young Adivasi priestess who was named Marie. Marie stayed with Issa for a period of 6 months, meditating with him, teaching him to stabilize the intensity of the Kundalini energies, and being a constant companion through this time. In return, Issa taught her about all that he had learned along the way. She loved the stories that he told, the treks he had made through forest and desert, stories of faraway cities made of stone, communities of monks where men slept upside down in caves and became rooted into the ground while standing on one leg. When he spoke of the leper colonies and the children who were cast out by the villagers, she sensed a kindred quality that she herself often felt, a feeling of not fully belonging, of knowing there was something else in life and somewhere else she was destined to be. Tell me again about your trip through Persia on the Silk Road, Marie coaxed him. Tell me about the people you traveled with. Issa smiled. He knew Marie was curious about the world outside the temple, that she longed to travel the way he did. He attributed this to her tribal group ancestry, deep memories that could not be pacified so easily. He thought again of his own mother, who was guided also by a deep instinct and purpose that had taken her all the way from Kashmir across to Palestine and Kemet and then back again. And so we had barely left Saraim's kingdom when bandits swooped in upon us. Issa continued his unfinished narrative, but our fine warriors on their mighty stallions quickly dispersed them, and we traveled on them across the passes, braving the snows and moving stealthily through enormous wild forests. Marie nodded, eyes half closed, taking another sweet sip of her tea. Issa could see the priest's wisdom in having him learn from a woman, testing him in maintaining his boundaries. Marie was the first woman he had been close to for such an extended period. She was different from him, more naturally grounded in the way of her ancestors. There was a delicacy about her presence that moved him, that made him want to wrap his arms around her and protect her. And so, over the months, as they shared teachings and stories, a profound love and understanding developed between the two of them. Although, in accordance with the monastic rules, this was never sexually consummated. For Marie, this was the closest she had ever experienced to having a family, and she became deeply devoted to Issa. Issa too felt a profound communion of heart, mind, and spirit with Marie. When his time came to graduate, he received the sacred thread with a mixture of elation and deep sadness, for he did not know whether or when they would ever see each other again. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. Please check out my website, kiarawindrider.net. Check out also my Facebook page, Kiara Windrider, my YouTube channel, Kiara Windrider, one word. Check out the Conscious Awakening Network. There's many different hosts, many different channels, and some amazing people that have been sharing their own stories, their own teachings, their own understandings about life and the universe. So join me again next week on Age of Gaia. Thank you.